Well, welcome. My name is Jennifer Sell, and I work as an English language instructor with the Unit of Cultural Linguistic Services in the HR department of the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And I'm very happy to be here with you today. It's exciting for me to share this topic and to be around inspiring people who are doing meaningful work. And I hope to share a few tips that might make communication even clearer in the future for you. I teach English as a second language classes to employees who work at the university. These employees come from a very diverse cultural, educational, linguistic, and language backgrounds. I also teach effective communication skills to native or near native English speakers like you. And plain language is one of those topics. And I'm really excited to share this time with you today because we've seen how plain language can offer people effective tools for everyday communication, no matter what the language of their audience. So just a housekeeping note, we're going to save questions for the end. I have quite a bit of material for you, but to try to make it a little bit interactive, I will be asking you if you'd like to add a few things to chat as we go, asking some specific questions for you. Okay, then we'll move ahead. I'd like to start with a definition of plain language, and this comes from plainlanguage.gov, which is a great authority on the topic. I'm going to read through the slide. Plain language is communication that your audience understands the first time they read or hear it. And it's defined by results. So your audience can find what they need, understand what they find, and use what they find to meet their needs. So we'll talk about some strategies to engage and motivate individual people in our audience, no matter how large it is. And we keep in mind that what might be plain language to one group of readers is not necessarily plain language to other groups. So hopefully I can give you some tips and practical ideas that you can try to put into practice right away. And these tips will apply to all audiences. So one other quick note, I do like to say that sometimes people feel a little bit sensitive about language. We feel sensitive about the things that we write or produce, and that's normal. And I just like to reassure people that this isn't like the plain language police coming to check your writing. We really go for good or better. And plain language is like a toolkit that you can apply to your individual situation and audience. All right, a little bit of background about plain language. Beginning with an executive memo in 1998, and most recently with the Plain Writing Act of 2010, the federal government has mandated that federal agencies use language that the public can understand and act on in various federal websites and publications. So the federal government has invested a lot in plain language. The question is why? And the basic answer is that when you speak and write so that more people understand you the first time, you save time, money, energy explaining and fixing mistakes. People follow through better, faster, and oftentimes they're happier doing it. Finally, plain language is an international movement. So if you were to Google plain language, you might find plain language tips for the Spanish language or the German language. It's not just English. It's meant as a movement to protect the legal and civil rights of people across the world. Health, legal, law enforcement, and customer service professionals are among the many who are finding that plain language strategies can really help them meet their goals more effectively. Okay, so let's just get down to it. What is plain language here in action? If you take a look at this quote, Jenny N, I'm not sure, are you able to read that out loud for me?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
It has come to our attention that it will be necessary for you to provide further documentation verifying your residency.
Thank you. And how about the next one?
Please send proof that you live in Wisconsin.
So that's sort of plain language in a nutshell. Take a look at those two. Which do you feel like you might rather read, especially if you imagine it in a larger document filled with similar types of language? So maybe type the number 1 for the first one or the number 2 in chat to let us know which one would you feel more motivated to read at the outset.
Definitely coming up twos.
Twos, okay, that's the one that I prefer too. I don't like to make assumptions, but I'd love to hear a little bit more or talk a little bit more about why that is. If you'd like to drop a note in chat, what are some of the differences that you see if we were to analyze the actual language? Why is it that number 2 might be more motivating for us to read, easier for us to understand, and maybe easier to take action on?
So Felicia says it's easier to read.
Okay. And
It's
what
clear.
makes it easier? Clear, okay.
It's clear and concise.
Whoopsie, sorry about that. I accidentally
there's lots of things coming in. Oh,
Okay, there we go.
More direct, language is less complex.
Okay, less complex, yeah.
Point,
So the
no
actual
room for
words we use?
misunderstanding.
Okay,
Fewer words.
yeah.
Short, sweet, and to the point.
That's a good summary of it. Those are all things that I noticed too, and I bet there's some more in chat, but there is this idea that the second version, many people feel, gives more information to the reader, even though it has fewer, really half the words as the original. Some people mention the original makes them feel a little intimidated. It's a little bit kind of like officialese. Whereas the second might feel a little bit more personal. It feels more friendly or polite because we've added that word please. And the vocabulary itself, we're using everyday words in that second version rather than words with longer syllables that may not even be necessary to our message. So the bottom line is that we can create concise, easy to process messages when we look at simplifying our messages as a whole. And this means we cut out information, words, sentences, or even whole paragraphs that our reader doesn't need. So it helps to ask, does my reader need this information to do what I'm asking them to do? And if they don't, cut it out. Okay, I'd like to take a look at this. So this would be talking a little bit about text on a web page, so electronic reading. And this is a heat summary map from the Nielsen-Norman group from 2006. And what they did was basically track people's eyeballs to see where they were focusing when they read on a web page. And what they found is that there's often a distinctive F-shaped pattern. So 2 horizontal stripes followed by a vertical stripe. More recently, studies show a few differences in readability, but the basic result is the same. And that's that the top left-hand corner is really what grabs readers' attention. And we know our attention can really be divided in a million different ways nowadays. So it can be very difficult to engage and keep the attention of our intended audience. People read about 18 to 20% of words on a web page. And ironically, they'll read fewer words the more words they see on the page. Many people will decide within the first 1 or 2 lines, and even the first 3 to 4 words of those lines, whether they're going to continue reading, whether the information is relevant for them. So the key lesson for us is that if our audience doesn't see how the message is important to them, they may not continue reading, and then our entire message can be lost. All right, so let's think about probably the key tip before we even start writing is thinking about our audience. Who are they? We need to talk to them. So before you create your message, answer this question for yourself. What does my audience need to know, to think, or to do after reading this message? So we're going to start with our call to action. What do we want our audience to do or know? And why is this message important to them? It might be different than why it's important to us. So we need to focus, think through the perspective of the audience. We're going to engage and motivate with examples and images if appropriate. So each image should clarify content. You want to place the image near the words that it illustrates. And we want to illustrate a single message. Choose relevant, culturally appropriate images that reinforce your message, and make sure that no examples or images annihilate anyone in your audience. So, as I said, position these images close to the text that they belong to, and position them so your readers maybe are seeing one image per every 2 screens or so if they're scrolling through. Speak to individuals no matter how big your audience is. And this means we want to use personal pronouns like I, we, and you. I'm going to read a quote from plainlanguage.gov about that. Quote, more than any other single technique, using you pulls users into your document and makes it relevant to them. When you use you to address users, they're more likely to understand what their responsibility is. Using we to refer to your agency makes your agency more approachable. Pronouns also make your sentences shorter and your document easier to read. So along those lines of making our document shorter and conversational to really talk to our audience, this kind of might be a little bit conflicting with what you remember your high school English teacher telling you. But with plain language guidelines, contractions are okay. So for example, instead of we will call you after we have received the document, we can say we'll call you after we've gotten your application. Likewise, phrases that use of the. For example, the parents of the client, we can say the client's parents. Those are things to look for when you're looking through your writing for changes for readability. We're motivated to act when we feel positive and when we know what we can do. So we want to build that conversational tone between the people in our audience and ourselves. How can we do it? Well, one tip might be to read your written text out loud to yourself. Does it sound stilted? Does it sound like it came from a bureaucratic office? Or does it sound more like what we call living room language? There is a great example from plain language advocate Catherine Spivey, and she says, for example, instead of saying something like, oh, please engage us in dialogue, maybe just say, please contact us. Tone is really important and powerful in blogs and other social media messages. And we want to go for personal, positive, and realistic. Finally, we need to be a little careful with acronyms and jargon. If you can, think about your own field of work and type in chat an example of jargon from that field. I'm going to give you an example from mine. It's the word realia, R-E-A-L-I-A, realia. And in the field of English teaching, realia is any object, any physical object you use. If you're talking about school supplies and you show students a pen, that's realia. And so I can ask my coworker to look for some realia for our lesson. But if I send an email with that word in it to the supervisors who are in our program, they're not going to know what I'm talking about. So jargon really is language that people within a certain group or circle of a field, they understand it, and it can be very useful as a shorthand, really, for people to communicate with each other. But what we need to be careful about is that it can be very, very excluding if anybody in our audience doesn't know what those words or acronyms mean. And they can be so natural to us, we forget to think about that. Okay, we're going to move on to short and simple messages, sentences, actually. Readability is often determined by the length of your sentences. So we're really getting down to some of the nitty-gritty here. We want to avoid long, complex sentences. We want to use subject, verb, object, word order, and try to limit your sentence to having only one subject per sentence. We can break longer sentence into 2 or 3 shorter sentences. So sometimes plain language may have more sentences than an original document, but probably will have fewer words and will be easier to read. In social media, we might want to take it even a step further. So if you are putting out a social media message, think about featuring only one idea or topic or step per paragraph. More and more people are reading social media on the smartphones, and really trying to focus in on those small screens can be tough on people's eyes and can make them less motivated to really look at and consider, spend time with our message. Okay, once again, we're gonna maybe catch some flack from our high school English teachers, but when we follow plain language guidelines, it's okay to begin sentences with words like and, but, or so. And finally, a general recommendation is to shoot for maybe 20 words in a sentence and an average paragraph of no more than 7 sentences. And if we're talking about social media, really 3 or 4 is probably the maximum that you want to go. So the bottom line is reduce words, eliminate redundancy, and prioritize the need to include and not just the nice to include information. All right, word choice. Selecting words, the actual choice we make about vocabulary is something that a lot of people associate with plain language, and word choice does matter. We want to use words that are familiar and everyday for people, and preferably ones that have fewer syllables in them. Just to note that on the resource list, the tip sheet that we are providing as part of this workshop, there are a couple of websites that can really help out with this. One is plainlanguage.gov, and they include a pretty comprehensive list of words, longer words, more official words that are familiar to some audiences but may not be to others. And then they give you helpful substitutes or other options to consider, including in your document. Another one is the UW-Madison Writing Center. Does the same thing, only they have an entire list of phrases. So how can you take a phrase of 4 or 5 words and substitute a perfectly good single word? Let's try that here. So we have a couple of words that we'll consider. So for example, additional, instead of saying additional, I can use the simple word more. And how that might play out, for example, instead of saying additional funding is required to complete our objective, I might just say we need more money to finish our project. In chat, take a look at the rest of these words and type a few substitutes that you can think of, everyday language, for one or more of these.
So definitely help for assist.
Okay.
Before for prior to.
That's a common one.
Use and get for utilize and obtain.
Okay, yeah. And implement's a little trickier. And the phrases might be too.
Because.
For due to the fact that.
Due to the fact, I
Yeah.
think, yeah. Implement could just be do.
Yeah.
In the event of could be in case.
Yes. And I just clicked on my example, if or in case are both great substitutes.
Yep,
Like you
that
said,
was on there.
utilize could be use, obtain, get. Implement, do, and we were thinking a little bit that idea of do for the first time. So start or set up. And then I heard due to the fact that, because. So these aren't the only words that you can use. There's not one correct answer, but it's really helpful to start brainstorming for yourself. Some of these everyday words that we just forget are just as good as their more complicated counterparts. Okay, we are gonna switch our focus to grammar right now. So get your coffee ready. No nodding off. I like grammar. I'm kind of a grammar geek, but I don't assume that everybody is. We're gonna talk about verbs right now. Sorry about that. I'll get back to where we were. You're getting a handy little flash forward here. I'm sorry. I set my notes down on my keyboard. Okay, there we are.
It's a black
We're
screen.
We're gonna watch a short video.
Oh, okay.
I'm gonna go back to Jenny. I want to make sure that I'm in the right place for you there.
Okay, so right now there's nothing being shared.
Okay. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
So are you still seeing nothing?
Correct.
Okay. Let's get back to where we need to be. I'm wondering if anybody would like to share with us while I'm getting us back to where we need to be. Active versus passive voice. Your understanding of it, active versus passive, which one is longer in terms of the number of words that you need?
Passive is definitely popping up here.
Okay. All right. I think we're all set. We'll share the screen now. Thanks for your patience, everybody. How are we doing there? Are you seeing anything?
No, not yet.
All righty.
Okay, it's gone back to your PowerPoint.
Okay. And are you seeing the?
It's the one with the outline on the side.
Okay. Here we go.
Not moving yet.
Oh, okay. I'm so sorry. Maybe what I can do is, okay, Jen. And I think you're seeing the whole screen.
We're not seeing anything now. Oh,
Okay.
there we go. Okay, it's back to the PowerPoint with the outline on the side.
Okay. And are you seeing the black screen now?
No, it's still the outline on the slide on the side.
Oh boy. Okay. We don't have our tech person on anymore, huh?
Yeah, she's still here.
I am here, however,
There's not much you can do.
exactly. I know. I apologize.
No,
I mean, it
it's-
seems like it's sharing your screen, when you can. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have multiple screens by chance?
Yes.
I'm wondering
That
if
might be what it is.
yeah, give that a whirl.
Yeah, I have terrible luck when I have both my screens. Julie Shears is on, who knows a lot about this stuff. She says she thinks you have to be in the PowerPoint for the video to play,
Okay,
not
gotcha.
just seeing the slides. Or if it's on YouTube, I don't know if you can go direct to the video.
Yes, and I can also get out of the video and just keep going if I can get my, let's try this once.
Okay, that's a single slide.
Okay, and what is the heading?
Active versus passive.
All right, so we're in the right place. That's good.
Okay.
Let's give it a go. Okay, so this is a video from the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. And it's sort of their summary of active versus passive and why it's important to use active voice in your writing.
Is there supposed to be sound?
Yes.
Yeah, we're not hearing the sound.
Okay, that's okay. We'll just move ahead. Okay, I'm sorry about that. I must probably needed to click the share sound button too, and I didn't, but I don't want to
Yeah.
use too much time on that. So what we'll do is move to passive versus active and take a look at this sentence here. The sealed envelope must then be sent via express mail to the address below. Type in chat the verb for this sentence. Simple verb. What are we seeing there?
Sent.
Yes, send. Okay, great. If it's a little tough to know whether something's active or passive, I was on Pinterest and I found this interesting note. How to identify passive voice? If you can insert by zombies after the verb, you have passive voice. So, for example, oh boy. For example, if you have a sentence like this, where you've got We'll get there. The sealed envelope must then be sent via express mail to the address below. We could change it to look something like this. Send the envelope to, and then thinking from the perspective of our audience, it might be helpful to have the mailing address right there, so that I don't have to hunt for it later in the document. Then use express mail could be a separate sentence. All right, we're going to go on to a little bit of talk about design. So the words and the content of our message is important. And the other key thing that plain language looks at is the look of our document. So if you were to drive up, this is just sort of a fun example about how our text can be user-friendly or not. If you were to drive up to this sign, say Thursday at 10 in the morning, what would your first reaction be, maybe? Mine might be to drive away again. It looks really daunting. There's an artist in Los Angeles named Nikki Silliantenberg, and she created what she calls a guerrilla redesign project for parking signs. And she came up with something that looks a little bit like this. And she realizes that the green and the red could cause some accessibility issues. So she is working on patterns now to show similar information. But you can see here how thoughtful, good design can really help people follow rules, guidelines, and laws. It's much easier to see whether or not you can park at 10 a.m. on a Thursday on something like this. So if we talk about formatting for readability, what's your first thought when you see this text in front of you? Is it something that you are motivated to read, or is it something that you might skip and go to other, messages in your email box before you hit this one? For me, it's one of those things where it feels like this is going to be a lot of work to get through and to decipher. Jenny, I'm not sure if you're able to read it for us out loud.
The look of a document is important and can impact the ease of understanding. Would you rather read documents that look easy to read, brief, important, and interesting, or ones that are not, using a minimum 12-point font size and a typeface, such as Times Roman, can be more readable? Using lists and tables to present information is easier to digest than blocks of solid text.
So thank you very much.
It's hard.
I kind of put you through the ringer there, and you did very well. It's a little over the top example just to demonstrate that the choices we make when we format things make a difference for readability. So take a look at something like this now. We've got tips there. It's probably going to be more motivating, more, people are going to be a little more enthusiastic to read the information because it looks like they'll be able to more easily. We have some key things here, some features. Number one, we're using the same font throughout. Serif font, Times New Roman, for example, is often easier for the eye to read in text, whereas sans serif font like Arial is great for headings and sometimes lists. So, and for screens for that matter, for phone screens. But really the key is trying to keep the font consistent, having a minimum of 12-point or larger. Not using too many colors or avoiding the really light colors is really the most important thing because they don't show up very well against those white backgrounds. We can see that we've added white space, and that's very key. Experts say that shooting for around 40% white space on your document is a good goal. It just makes it easier for the eye to read. One way we can do that is to incorporate lists, bulleted lists when possible. So when we're looking at lists, there's a few things to keep in mind. You can't go wrong with the solid black circles for your bullets. Other options, for example, when you see these check boxes, what do you as a reader think about? You could add in chat. What does it make you want to do?
Task to complete.
Yeah, exactly. It looks like a checklist. So it's kind of tipping me off that these are things I might need to do. We can use check marks if all of the steps in our list are applicable or they're important for all of the people in our audience to do. As far as numbered lists, we often save those numbered lists for true sequences. So when there really is an order in our list that we want people to complete or to perceive the information, that it really comes in a sequence. Our text is left justified. That means you can see that it's flush down the left side. We have what's called kind of a ragged right margin. That's going to be easier for people to read faster. And then in terms of italics, underlines, we avoid those. Underlining can be an issue because people may think it's a link. Italics and underline both cause the brain to just expend, it needs to expend a little bit more energy to decipher and to read. And that energy can add up over time. So if you do want to highlight information, using bold might be a good choice in moderation. So bold those headings for that important information. Great. Let's keep going here. I'm going to have you take a look at the next slide and don't read the words. It's not a close read, but just take a look at what your first impression is. Is the blue version or the red version, the first on the left or the second on the right, something that you feel more motivated to read? And you could even pop in chat either blue or red. So without even really looking at the words, what do you think?
Definitely
is draw
red.
the reader in? Red. Okay, red. Yeah. Same for me. And it's right off the bat before I even look at the words. So why is that? Well, once again, we can see some of these strategies in action. I can see in the red that there's more white space. There are bolded headings. There are lists. So it just looks like I'm going to be able to find the information I need much more easily, even if I'm scanning or skimming the text. If you were to read more closely, you'd notice that a lot of the words are more everyday and that we're using personal pronouns so that the reader knows exactly what's needed of that person. It is very easy to see what the deadline is, and if I have questions, how can I get help? So those are the things we're looking at. Those headings are sort of like signposts, as attorney plain language advocate Brian Garner talks about that a lot. Those are like signposts to help our reader figure out where they are in the document and where they want to go. He also says this can help you as the writer organize your thoughts into categories. It lends some visual variety to the page, so there's less getting tired with that kind of more block formatting. And it instantly signals transitions between types of information. Okay, we're going to try this. Well, actually, I'm not going to try this. We'll do it at the end if I have it and I can make sure that we have the sound with it. But we're going to keep going now, and we're going to talk a little bit about social media specifically. So I think you probably noticed some of these strategies might be especially helpful for social media. Our goal is to inspire people to action or to encourage them to consider our message. So we really want to motivate people to read our stuff. And these are some ways we can help make that happen. Focus on your reader's needs. So we want to emphasize kind of what's in it for the reader. It needs to be clear why the reader would want or care about the information in our message. And YouTube is a good example of a medium that really kind of demands that unwavering focus on people's wants and needs, because viewers can find literally thousands of videos, other videos to watch instead of ours. May not be excited about spending extra time deciphering our message or wading through information that doesn't speak to them or their needs. We talked a little bit about using everyday words. Jargon or acronyms could be a little different from social media. The best practice is to avoid them unless we're absolutely sure our audience understands them. But acronyms can shorten your message a little bit. That might help when you have limited space. And jargon might also attract some of your target audience. So I have a coworker who had a job where he was trying to appeal to potential climate conscious audience. And that meant he used words like sustainable, organic, and some other things that might not be as everyday for everybody, but he thought would be keywords that his target audience would want to know. So just be thoughtful when you use jargon or acronyms. Personal pronouns, verbs when possible, so those action words rather than nouns, changing that passive verb to an active voice, and then staying grammatical and using correct punctuation. I think for business messages, it's still best practice or a little safer to stick with correct grammar and proper punctuation. Some people notice these things and they'd be less likely to find you a reliable source if your message doesn't follow some of those standard guidelines. Keeping sentences short. Remember, clear, direct text also supports transcriptions and translations. And so with them, you have broader accessibility to a wider audience. So in short, we want to get to the point. All righty. Let's talk specifically about Twitter. Short text is almost a guarantee when you have a limit of 140 characters, but people can get a lot of tweets in a day. So we want to make sure that our message stands out. One way to do that is to include a link to a web page or a photo with the call to action that we have, really clear, to focus on a service or an event or an activity. You can put a link in your message and put it early in the message so it doesn't get overlooked. Catherine Spivey, the plain language advocate I mentioned, says you might risk breaking up links if you put them late or at the end of the message and people retweet it. So that secondary audience may not be able to get to your page. You can also use URL shorteners like bit.ly.com, and they will shorten kind of long or clunky links into something more manageable and digestible. You can even customize them into a specific word or message that you choose, and that could reinforce your branding. So that can be very helpful. And using hashtags can help. We're going to move on to emails, and I want to give a big thank you to Jenny Newgart for providing this sample. Oops, sorry about that. I leaned in, so let's go back to that excellent email message. Okay, so if you're just, are you seeing that, Jenny?
No, not yet. It's black.
Okay, gotcha. Sorry about that. Okay, we'll go back to share again and we'll get that up. If you take a look through this, are you seeing the email now, Jenny?
Yes.
Excellent, I'm faster at that. If you take a look through this, you're gonna notice a lot of good things. What's effective in this email? Can you find the call to action? For some of the most important information? I can see it real easily when I look at that heading, that title, apply for the Wisconsin Youth Leadership Forum. Might make a great subject line too for the email. I can see that the links are set out, so they're very helpful I don't have to hunt for them, and contact information is very clear. If you take a look at the link that it links to, that's also a great website. The link is correct. In short, it's just a really nice email. It's hard to find a lot of redundancy or unimportant information. Still, since this is a plain language webinar or training, let's try reducing the actual number of words here and tweaking the formatting a little bit to make it even more readable for our target audience. If you take now a look at an after version, first you want to notice your initial reaction. This is basically the same information, but it looks different. Does it feel like it's something you might be more likely to dive into? Let's talk a little bit about the pros and the cons of this possible version. Here we've used a number of plain language strategies. We've got the white space, we've got the bulleted lists. We're using bold to highlight the important information like the application deadline. We've got a call of action. I noticed that the call of action might be actually more than just apply for this. If we look at the bolded line toward the end of the message, we also say share this if you know someone who might be interested. So that might be something that we consider rewording that top sentence to include that we want people to share it too. So apply for this or share this message. Maybe it has a little bit less conversational tone, but we did try to keep in the everyday words. We've got the thank you from Jenny, the exclamation point that's showing the enthusiasm. The other thing I did want to mention is that sometimes when people open emails on their smartphones, bulleted lists may look a little bit wonky. So what do we do about that? I would write the email and send it to myself first so I can see, does it work or does it not really work with my formatting that I've chosen? Any comments about that, Jenny?
Somebody said this version's easier to get the idea and act, still too much punctuation and more words than needed.
Okay. So we could take a peek at, and that actually brings up a good point. So whenever I do plain language translations like this, I'm always thinking of it as sort of a team effort. So I'm always running by my version with other people to see how they perceive it. I don't want to cut out information that really is key or cut out so much that people might misinterpret my result. So it's always good to work as a team with these or do a little bit of user testing with a reader in your target audience to see if they really are getting out of it what you want them to. All right, we're going to move on to Facebook now. Which plain language strategies lend themselves well to Facebook messages? Well, from what I can tell, one of the biggest recommendations is to keep those Facebook posts short. And by short, people are talking about the length maybe of a Twitter update. If you have more to say on the topic, think about sending separate posts. Dividing your information up into separate posts and timing them for the best effect. You could also supplement the Facebook post with longer version of your message on a blog. So a blog post that gives a little bit more detail, and the link to that post is in the Facebook message. Avoid posting something that's so long that the space limitations cause it to end in a see more or a get more prompt. You might find that some readers aren't willing to take that extra step. And then instead of using words, consider sharing those photos, those images or videos that are representative of your audience and that may tell your story a little bit more vividly. We're going to take a look at a Facebook post that Jenny provided for us here. I didn't rewrite this, but I just wanted to see if anyone would like to add to chat here in the last minute or two that we have. Any strategies that you consider today that you might use with something like this? Once again,
Cutting it down. Sorry.
Before you read, no, that's okay, Jenny. Let me tell you about some things that are great about this first, okay? So there's a call to action. If you go to the link in the post, it's the correct link. There's a lot of important information there. The website it links to has really nice headings, white space, some bold font, and bulleted lists to make all that content really readable. So those are really great things about it. If we want to shoot for a shorter message, that might be great. We were thinking, you know, a Twitter length message would be 140 characters. This message tops out at 689 characters. So that might be one of the strategies we apply, is figuring out if it works with this kind of a graceful way to separate the information out into a couple of different posts. So Jenny, were there any other things mentioned in chat?
Yeah, just cutting it down, bullet points, add maybe a photo. Provide the link closer to the beginning or put it first. Just, yeah, really thin out a lot of words in there.
Yeah, those were all things that I noted as well. And the final thing was really taking a look at the words that are in the message. So for example, if you're able to look at the second sentence, it says, this is an 8-month training on how to advocate for policies. Is a little bit of a weaker verb. If we could use a more active verb, that can help shorten the sentence too. We could say, this 8-month training focuses on advocating how to advocate for policies. All right. So when we think about using plain language in our work, these are some of the top ways that people have talked to us about they found it useful right away. So writing emails is one of the first ones people think of. Posting on social media, drafting reports, creating marketing materials, training staff, asking for and giving feedback, and designing PowerPoints. You may be able to think of some more too. It's possible to work on strategies, for example, to use plain language in verbal conversation. And that's kind of a whole nother topic. But I feel like the sky's the limit here. And I want to thank you for a few things, for taking this time to share with me and considering plain language, the topic of clear communication. It gets easier with practice, and I guarantee you that any effort you put in on the front end pays off on the back end. People feel more included and engaged when they understand the material that we send to them. And then the second thing is, I can't really imagine a session that was more crazy and not not easy to follow because of the presenter error. So I apologize for that. I feel better that you can get the PowerPoint and the tip sheet as part of the materials that you have from the conference. So thank you once again. I too have learned a lot today and I appreciate your patience. Happy editing.
Thank you, Jennifer. Very helpful. The Board for People with Developmental Disabilities is committed to making our materials more plain language and user-friendly. So that was very helpful. And there's been such an interest that we wanted to offer this presentation. So we're actually going to be working with Jennifer on offering a longer training, maybe 2-3 hours in the future. So keep an eye on our BPDD Facebook page if you like us there, and you'll see information about that coming out in the near future. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.